Vanessa grew up in Scientology as a second-generation member, and she was born in San Diego, California, and she grew up in Los Angeles. She was a public member of the church, meaning she was not in the C organization. And during her formative years, she went to Scientology schools. She had to deal recently with deciding if she was going to stay in the church or if she was going to leave, which meant that her family and friends still in it were going to disconnect from her. But she chose her freedom. Vanessa actually is also a very, very big member of the Los Angeles animal rescue community, and she does a wonderful job with the wonderful and lucky pets that she has. And she's currently pursuing higher education. She's going to be getting a degree, and she's studying psychology, and she's loving what she's learning, and she's learning so much about her childhood experiences, and she is sharing a lot with us about what she's learning. She approached me in order to be on this podcast so that she could, for the first time, tell her story. And she's had 2 episodes on the podcast, and then this special episode for Patreon subscribers. I am so happy to have her on the show, and I love, as she said, that she's giving herself the gift of being able to express her freedom of speech. Here's Vanessa now. I am so happy to be able to have Vanessa back on. And it's always a pleasure to talk to you and to learn about your experience and to now learn from you about what you're learning. But I know that after we talked the last time, or last 2 times, the 2 different segments that it's turned into be, because our conversation was just so full of so much that it was enough for 2 whole episodes, that there was more, and there's always going to be more, which is really true, that you could talk for days and years, but that there were some significant subjects that you wanted to be able to cover that you didn't cover or get more into and further into now that we're talking again. So I'm really happy to be able to do that. And so I'll let you kind of take it away, because I know that you have your list, and I love that. And so let's get started. So welcome back.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, there were a few things that obviously just came to mind, and I started making my list and wanted to make sure that I brought them up, because after reflecting, they were, huge things to me that could possibly help somebody else going through the same situation. So I wanted to make sure to mention it. And if anybody out there is listening is going through the same thing, usually right when you are trying to leave and create new belief systems, part of what I feel like the confusion was this whole fake news thing. And not only that being a topic out in the real world right now, which it wasn't when I was dealing with this. My father talking about the different things, the different reasons why I was unhappy. And he sent me a package in the mail, and it was 4 magazines. And they're a propaganda arm for the church. And it used to be framed a lot more like a journal. Like it was hating psychs or psychologists and psychiatrists and all that. But the letter that came with the package said, please read these. These are real journalists, and these are real investigative reporters, and this is part of why I got involved in Scientology. And he really believed that it was an independent entity outside of Scientology, which in turn, this is my dad. This is somebody who's taught me almost everything I know. And so to have him tell me this is real news, it was just like so mind bending. And then you have people on the outside world there to help you and say, no, that doesn't seem right. But you're just so confused. You don't know who to trust.
Right.
That it can be a really, really traumatizing experience, just not knowing who to believe in general,
Yeah, and so I think to be able to also say how confusing it is, just if we divide it out, because if you're just talking about getting information from a parent, that alone is something you want to be able to rely on that has accuracy. And a lot of people, in retrospect, when they grow up, they realize some of the family stories they've been told are not quite accurate and makes this person look bad and that person look like the victim or whatever else because it was filtered through their eyes. But that's sort of natural. You expect that kind of differentiation or kind of permutation over time, and a rewriting of that history. But then you have, in this situation, your parents being fed information that what you're saying is sort of just not correct from the start, which then they don't question, and then they give it to you. So it's coming from different sources. And so, okay, so then that was the content of these magazines. And so what else did you talk about? Sort of what would be a typical highlight kind of an article from a magazine like that? What would they talk about?
The psychiatric drugging of children and how psychologists, psychiatrists are, causing a lot of stress around the world. They have a theory called pain drug hypnosis, where like apparently psychologists and psychiatrists are gonna do PDHing to you, so inflict pain drug or hypnosis. And so it's another layer of mental mind trap that people face when walking into a therapist's office to get help. And also on that subject, I remember being a child and signing all my forms before I started any course. And I remember asking what one of them was for. And somebody explained to me that, oh, you're signing this in the case that you ever get locked up in a psychiatric hospital, we will have the authority to come get you. And so having all of that in your brain while you're walking into a therapist's office does not seem safe. But there's, obviously there was inside of me a core sense of something new. Okay, let's just try this out because the rest of it's not working. But that's a lot to be up against when you're taught that from a super young age.
I'm actually really glad you told me about the EDH, because now I have a even clearer sense about what the nervousness is about someone even coming into my office, or what they will be expecting, or what they would be relieved to not be having happen in that space. That's very interesting.
Yeah, and I was so hypervigilant at that time anyway. I mean, hypervigilance is just almost born into me as a Scientology kid. But like on top of that, actually having the idea that if I actually did have a mental breakdown, they would come get me. Like, I don't know, it took me a while to let go of that belief too, and know that that's not even real.
Right.
Which is really a lot.
Yes.
And then also something I really wanted to talk about was TRs and which is in Scientology, which is training routines. And you start these super young. And since studying a bit about dissociative states, I have come to understand that TRs kind of prep you to dissociate super easily and super quickly. And a lot of people have also pointed out that the training routines can put you into a hypnotic state, so possibly you're more suggestible afterwards and stuff like that. But just so people understand what TRs are, there are different levels. And I started doing the children's communication book. I think I was 5 or 6. And there are a series of drills that you do. And they're basically teaching you to be there comfortably and confront, which actually means sit very still, don't listen to any of your body's reactions, and just take it. So there's a lot of things that they do. There's a drill called bull baiting, where what they're trying to do is get emotions out of you, and you just need to sit there, no flinching, no excessive blinking, and for really long periods of time. And when somebody can do that and not get any reaction out of you, then you're past and you can go on to the next level. Otherwise, it's a flunk. But now understanding what I know about human emotion, that is the worst thing to do because it can divorce you from your sense of like trust in yourself and your body's reactions. You know, if you're in a situation that's scary, you should feel scared, or it's okay that your body is reacting. And this technique really hails disassociation as like a superpower. And so the more I learned about dissociation and it being kind of like a coping mechanism, I found that a very simple thing for me to do if I'm getting upset or anything is just completely dissociate. And on top of that, when you're getting auditing and you're in sessions, there's something called exteriorization, where that you exteriorize from your body. So the idea is that your spirit looking down 3 feet at your body. And this is kind of like hailed as like, oh, you exteriorize. It's like another superpower. And the more that I've pushed myself to be mindful and take up practices of mindfulness, which have to do with being in your body and breathing and all of the joys that come with actually being a human being, I've noticed that that was something that's super harmful to teach to children and all humans. If you can't express your emotions and you're used to just shutting them down and locking them away, it's not good, you know?
It's not good. And so just to jump in here, and I know there's a lot more to talk about, but so ironic that with the PDH, the pain drug hypnosis, being that warning. So here, the TRs, yes, it is a form of hypnosis. And so it so often happens that within groups where they want you not to look at what they're doing, but they want to warn you about what the people out there are going to do to you. Like that they're going to be the ones controlling you, and they're going to be the ones abusing you, and they're going to be the ones trying to do hypnosis. Then you don't think, it doesn't occur to you that they're doing the things that they seem to look down on in the world outside, because why would they be doing the thing that they're telling you is a bad thing to do? So it really redirects your focus, and you don't realize it's what's happening to you. And then the other part about that, this quote of yours, the dissociation as a superpower, that is really amazing, because yeah, on the one hand, you can probably handle it if someone who's really tough gets into your face. And that's actually a good thing at times, that you're not going to back down if you really have a cause that you care about. But it does do exactly that. It disconnects you from your feelings. And so if you're in an abusive relationship and someone's in your face, you don't then register, it seems like, that this is wrong, because you just know you can take it and you dissociate, and then it probably keeps something that is an unhealthy connection going for longer without you reacting to it or having that sense that you don't deserve this or the person's being abusive. Would that be fair to say?
Completely. I've unfortunately had friends who have been in spousal situations after this, or things after growing up the way we did, where you kind of want to be like, is this, what is going on here? And, you know, is this battered woman syndrome? Is this what? And it's that exact thing. It's almost like priming you for not responding. Right. And it's a bizarre thing. Yeah. Right. And also just not wanting to be associated with being a meat body. You know, that's L. Ron Hubbard really sets it up that it's like a real low type thing to be associated and be a meat body. So you kind of always have this idea that you're the spirit and you're running the body, but that prevents a lot of self-care. That prevents a lot of taking care of putting good things in your body and stuff like that, because you're not really associated with being your body.
Right. And I think, you know, when I hear terms like that, I think, wow, and it calls itself a church, and a church uses the term meat body. Like, that doesn't quite go, you know, really? That's like very odd.
For sure.
Right? It's like
sure.
And Rocky Horror, yeah, you know. Right.
For sure. And to your point about them sometimes doing things that they're warning you against, I do have to say, not throwing the baby out with the bathwater has been like a really big deal, because some things L. Ron Hubbard hits on are kind of correct. You know, he pulled a lot of psychology and a lot of people who were doing things at the time. So in the beginning, I just wanted to, if I heard a word that he kind of had mentioned, I would throw out the idea entirely. And he was especially nefarious in the way that he like took things that kind of, like the mind body connection, but then just took it to the next level. And,
right.
That was challenging as well to sort through stuff like that.
I wanted to, very. And I wanted to get back to what you were going to bring up about the abuse. I was curious also because when you describe bull baiting, you know what that looks like and what that sounds like. And I don't know if this would be disturbing for you to do this. So if it is, then don't do it. But can you give some examples of what that would look like or what that would sound like?
Yeah, for sure. You would be like sitting across from each other about 3 feet, and the person who you would be drilling would be across from you, like blank faced, and your entire job would be to rouse them. So whatever it takes. You can't touch them, but you can get really close in their face and kind of try to freak them out, or you can call them ugly, say they're stupid, anything that you think they might have charge on. If you don't know them and you can't go personal, you could say, hey, I heard everyone around here thinks you're a slut, or, like really abusive type language in actuality. Or you can be funny, tell jokes. The lighthearted people will tell jokes and see if they can try to get a smile. I've had friends who were grown women tell me that they had little boys grabbing their boobs to try to get a response, which that never happened to me, but their point is to just get a reaction.
Right.
And you do it until you don't react anymore. So that there's something really creepy about the deadness of the eyes that comes after not reacting for so long.
Right. The deadness of the eyes. And I think also for, like you were saying, the little boys grabbing women's boobs, what does that do to their heads? Also, the little boys, like that's somehow okay to do to help someone because it's part of this therapeutic process.
Yeah.
Wow, it's just head spinning on so many different levels. But you were going to talk about the abuse, people tolerating or learning to tolerate maybe what's not healthy for them. And so was there more that you wanted to say about that?
I have a lot of friends who have gone through leaving the church and then gotten into really abusive situations afterwards. Sometimes leaving the church while also being in abusive situations and being gaslighted by their partner. And it's really sad when people aren't set up to know how to handle these kinds of situations. And that's kind of why I love your podcast. I think protecting ourselves from systems of control like this is just so important. And like learning the critical thinking skills. Just this week, I had to write a paper on critical thinking, which I love. I've taken many classes now on it. And something that was very interesting in the research that we were covering is that critical thinking is very hard to teach just as a skill. You have to teach it alongside the subject matter.
Right, make it specific. Because if it's a general message, you might not know how to apply it in individual situations. That's a really smart way to provide that. Sounds like your school really has a nice way of doing it.
It's pretty incredible that now every class I take, there's a section on critical thinking right at the front. And I mean, I love that, and never experienced anything like this. I mean, the word critical in itself was not okay. It was not an okay word. And that's another challenge that ex-members come across is, seeing words that don't mean the same as they used to. If you were being critical before, you were really not okay. You would, even if you're out, you're still avoiding that word, or reasonable, or, things like that.
So being critical or being reasonable are bad things. It's so interesting. Okay.
Right. And open-minded. I mean, being open-minded pretty much saved my life. And, you don't want to be so open-minded that anybody can walk in and give you information, but it is good to be open-minded enough to question things and say, I don't know, let me find out, instead of total and utter certainty. Especially if it's not fact-based.
Right. And so just I don't want to interrupt your list, but just I want to just say something about reasonable, and I'm writing this down, reasonable and critical and uh, open-minded. I mean, if someone is being reasonable or using critical thinking or being open-minded, that might then mean that they're going to be looking elsewhere, that they're really not going to be so enamored with what they're getting in Scientology because it might not seem reasonable to them, it might not make sense, or they might be using their critical thinking and seeing how there are things that are hypocritical or conflicting in what they're learning, and like it's only if it's true for you, it's true, like that kind of idea of what, no, but here is the truth. And so why do you have an out where if it's true for you, it's true like that? There's so many things that when you look at them next to each other, they don't come together. And also being open-minded, that again is a value in a lot of places and in a lot of social situations in a lot of countries. But it's not a value in Scientology, I guess, because then you're going to be open-minded. You're going to be thinking things through and maybe open to other ways of learning or other people to learn from. It's interesting that it all just, as you're mentioning it, it just seems like it's a threat, or maybe it was a threat to L. Ron Hubbard at the time.
Yeah.
Okay. So go.
Well, that's what we learn, right? Is we learn the different ways after the fact that it was all kind of set up to benefit the leader.
Uh-huh.
It's an interesting experience being a kid in Church of Scientology because you really do think that they're the authority. Like, it's almost as if you're not a citizen of the United States. Like, there's that government, but the Scientology government is kind of what you're really dealing with. It handicaps safeguards that are put in place in normal society and with like normal human services and child services, and there's all of these things that are put there to protect children. And when everybody in the group has agreed to not go to law enforcement and everybody in the group has agreed this is how we train our children and this is what we do, it sends a message to a child that there's no safeguards in place. This is all there is, and that really pissed me off once I found out how important it is out here in the real world and how, of course, a lot of things slip through the cracks all the time and every safeguard doesn't work. But there are also situations like if a child is severely depressed and people at school are starting to notice or things like that, there's consequences and there's help that can be given and all of these things that children in these enclosed environments just don't have access to. I mean, I didn't go to any other doctor other than a Scientology doctor ever until I was out, so that was something that really like stuck with me from learning just a little bit about the school systems and how mandating court reporting works and stuff like that.
Wow, right. Those details. That's so interesting. When I talk to people who were often were born and raised in groups, and I think true for everyone, but I found more often with the girls and the women that, especially with Bible-based groups, that they were not raised with this idea that they have constitutionally protected rights. They don't know what their rights are, and they don't think it's right to act on them, even if they did know what they were, because the rules or the laws of the state or the country don't apply there. And it is amazing to learn that you have a freedom of movement, freedom to question, right? You have a lot of freedoms that are protected when you're not living in a police state and when you're not living in a dictatorship. And that there's some cultic groups and relationships that don't afford you those rights, and from a young age you're not even quite taught them. So I'm sure it's really good to be learning this, and I wonder if it gives you, as you're saying, kind of more of a feeling of safety in the world outside, because I know a lot of people in these groups feel that they need to stay in order to be safe. But what a lot of people have experienced and what they feel is that once they left, they had a sense that they were safer, and they had people to call if they were in trouble. And there were kind of government entities that they could rely upon if something went wrong. They didn't know that existed. If you have that feeling of feeling safer on the outside than you did on the inside.
I think at first it was very confusing because you kind of know that you're not really vibing with what's going on the inside, but it's all you know. And then the outside is also, you're really primed at that time to feel really scared of the outside world. And it's a prison planet and all of these things. As I began to be a bit more vulnerable, trust people who were new to me, make relationships in my community, doing, as I say, like volunteer work. I've made some really good friends. And in that regard, yeah, I feel much safer on the outside. And I feel like the kindness of strangers has been really remarkable. And people who just are kind just to be kind.
Isn't that nice when that happens? I think now people who just do nice things just for the sake of doing nice things, and it's touching. It's touching. I hear myself saying, thank you. That's so, wow, that's really nice. Like if you drop something and someone comes to pick it up and you don't even know them, it just makes a huge difference in your day, right?
Yeah.
There is this transitional time where people aren't necessarily feeling more secure right away. They're in fact probably feeling less so and a lot more nervous during that period of transition out of a group. And for people to be sensitive about that.
For sure. I mean, we're still dealing with an organization that has ridiculous resources. I think people nowadays have a lot more understanding, thankfully, to Leah's show, The Aftermath, and documentaries like Going Clear. I mean, the fact that something like this exists in my lifetime, and if somebody wants to get to know me, they can watch this incredibly produced show. I don't have to sit down and tell them my story. They've seen the show. They understand what's going on. That's just invaluable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's invaluable. Right. Right. Because there are only so many times also that you want to have to keep telling the story because you want to be able to also talk about other things. I'm sure every once in a while, for at least 5 minutes a day.
Another thing that I found super interesting was when I was studying attachment theory, and which has to do with it's a theory having to do with how infants and children attach to people in their lives. And with the theory, there can be different types of attachment styles later in life and stuff like that. And something that I remember going over with you actually was, I think I had told some type of story about my parents, and that, the fact that my parents, of course, were the authority over me, but over them there was an authority, and that's the cult leader. And a lot of times it's the cult leader almost is like a parent in regards to the choices that are being made in your life and what kind of schools you're going to and things like that. It all falls under the umbrella of what's been dictated by the cult leader. And I think that makes it a lot harder for children to go through these different attachment stages and developmental stages with their parents when there's kind of this overarching parental type figure bringing out, which L. Ron Hubbard was dead by the time I was born, but it was just his policy that was overarching everything, And I mean, I knew, like, innately, I kind of knew as a kid that it was weird that we were, like, clapping to a man's picture on the wall and people were saying hip hip hooray, and I kind of knew it was weird and, like, maybe something I would have to deal with later on, but everybody else is doing it, so,
I love that. That was something you were going to have to deal with later on. Like, I'm putting that on my therapy list or auditing list. Like, I'm going to have to talk about that.
And L. Ron Hubbard had some weird parenting things, I mean, he wrote an entire book called Child Dianetics about how to raise and treat and process children. And that was pretty much opposite of everything I was learning in developmental psychology. As a reference, I remember being shown where it says that children are essentially PTS to their parents, meaning potential trouble source. And it's really weird, just little things that are put in the middle of the child-parent relationship that really don't need to be there.
No, not at all. I mean, it already has its own joys and its own stressors and just all the natural things that go along with being a child or being a parent. But to add in that the child is a potential trouble source, it's sort of void of that warmth and the love and the forgiveness and the learning. And also, you used a phrase before, which was how to process children. Okay, so
yeah, I know.
Right?
Crazy, right?
Exactly. Right? So that it's one of those times where I think like this sort of dystopian future science fiction movie, processing. Which I think about a lot when I think about this group. But anyway, what does that mean?
This is one of those terms that I've since realized is so creepy. But when you get auditing, it's also called processing.
Okay.
Any type of counseling, auditing, Scientology it's Scientology processing. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, so interesting. Okay. Yeah. All right. Okay. So, but going back to this idea of attachment theory, so was there more that you wanted to say about that now that you learned more about how it's different from the way you were raised, and also that there's someone else involved in your relationship that is guiding your relationship?
Yeah, I mean, just studying those philosophies and being able to then, for me, having the knowledge about it has then led to opening the door of healing it. But the first thing is like kind of understanding what it is that's going on. With the attachment theory, that's kind of just what I wanted to say. There was something about when I initially, first of all, like found out all about PTSD, it explained a lot. But then also finding out about complex PTSD, which is like a sub offset of PTSD, and it happens a lot with children from cultic environments or high traumas or things like that. And it's been so helpful for me to actually study and understand these things. Like one of the symptoms is like a feeling that you're not relating to humans as part of your identity, like special, this. These are all things that were pretty much directly taught to us, and it's empowering to be able to kind of like see these things, and then I don't want to feel like that anymore. I want to embrace being a part of society and culture, and so I think knowledge is power, like empowering yourself, finding out as much as you can, not necessarily labeling yourself with all these disorders or anything like that, but if you happen to come across something that resonates with you, kind of looking into it and looking at what the treatments are for it. I mean, most of the treatments for CPTSD is mindfulness and meditation and self-care and therapy and, stuff like that. So it's very helpful to become educated. I have watched Chris Shelton's channel just like nonstop since he started it, which has been an incredible resource, and I highly recommend his critical thinking channel.
Yes, it's really, really good. And he's been at it for a while, and so he's really covered so many subjects, but so much about critical thinking and so much about trauma and really understanding from his own personal experience, what he went through. And I think it's reminding me as you're talking about this polyvagal theory that I was reading about recently, where the man, his last name was Porges, who put together this theory. There's this idea, as I understand it, that when you've been through trauma or repeated intense stress in your childhood, that then when you're dealing with trying to make connections with people, that you find yourself going in the direction of protection rather than connection. And that there is this inevitable sense that if you get too connected, you're going to get hurt. And so you retreat towards this protective place, which may or may not be necessary in your life now, but from your past experience, we learn from our past, and then it informs our decisions in the future. And sometimes it causes us to have losses that we don't need to have anymore, which is also part of the attachment theory, that we say no to things that could be feeding our heart and people who could be feeding our heart. And so it's a really important thing to learn about. I'm really glad you brought it up.
You kind of feel like everything is like a movie, and this couldn't possibly be. Tori Magoo explains it like you're on the Truman Show, and it's pretty close like that. And the stuff that's happening is so odd. It seems that it couldn't possibly be real, and I mean, all of that just goes to the dissociative state that, like, being gaslighted and all of these things will do to you. Said timing is everything. I felt it was important to talk to you now because there are certain things that I felt 2 years ago that, I've written down, but I'm changing so rapidly and adapting to the real world. And that's the thing about us humans. We adapt super quickly and we're incredibly resilient. And so I kind of wanted to also just tap into and make a recording of like this period of my life where, it's far enough along from the trauma, but not completely not speaking words anymore, I mean, Scientology will always be probably one of my first languages, but,
I like how you said Scientology will be one of my first languages. Yeah, sure. Because it's through not only the words, but what they mean and the vision that they produce and the feelings they produce. So to go back to this idea of fake news, now that you are more attuned to critical thinking and also being able to see how prevalent fake news is within certain environments and now just, when you turn on the television.
Yeah.
Or read a report or a study or whatever. So what have you learned, kind of in keeping with the theme of the podcast, keeping yourself safe? So how can you know a little bit more clearly? It's not always easy to define it 100%, but how would you know, or what questions do you need to ask to find out if something is fake news or not?
For me, it was learning about the biases we all have. For instance, confirmation bias, and the heuristics that we use to make decisions as human beings.
That's a good word.
Thank you. And our brains are like the most incredible things, and they also like to take shortcuts. And so becoming aware of those shortcuts, becoming aware of the fact that if I already believe something, it's going to be a lot easier for me to confirm that. And it takes a lot of extra energy to look at other things. I think critical thinking is the art of thinking about your thinking and making sure that you're not just letting anything in willy-nilly, actually looking at and evaluating, checking it against experiences that you have to see if it's true or not. And also, as I mentioned, just actually having access to scientific research and the scientific method, it gives me at least a checking point of I can see what current research and real research. I mean, that's another thing. It's a lot of research is presented as, and people who aren't trained to really look for certain bias in research. You would never find bias in like peer-reviewed research. That the whole point is to not have that. Aristotle has a quote that intelligence is trying on something without having to take it in, or something along those lines. But just being able to entertain ideas without taking them on as your own knowledge has been really, really helpful to me.
Really helpful. Thank you. And with Aristotle, I mean, Can't get a lot better than that. So thank you
Yes.
so much. And I have a feeling we'll talk again, as more gets thought about and uncovered and there are words for it, and in things that you've been able to kind of shed, and other things that have more of a lasting impact, and why is that, and how does it affect you? I mean, there's so many different things to talk about over time, so, but thank you for your time and for sharing what you've experienced and what you've learned for people out there. It's a really wonderful gift. I really appreciate it.
Of course. And I remember in the very beginning you saying, I was very worried about not speaking out and things like that because I still wanted, I thought there was a chance to save my parents at that exact moment or whatever it was. And at this point, I really realized that, like, not that it's a lost cause to try to save anybody inside or try to get them to open their eyes, but me doing this is like shutting the final door with them. And I'm okay with that because we're on the prevention side now. I'm like, it's really important so that people understand how to not get involved with groups like these. And hopefully conversations like this can help.
I just got goosebumps. That's really powerful. Really powerful.
Thank you.
Okay, I hope to talk to you soon.
Okay, Rach. Talk to you soon.
One more thing before you go. This was one of these conversations where I took so many notes because there were so many interesting things that I wanted to be able to remember, and I wanted to be able to also share with you. I had so many reflections. I find it so interesting also when Vanessa uses certain terms. I mean, they are different and sometimes very disturbing. What I also found really telling were the three terms that she mentioned that are really bad terms and bad words in Scientology, things that in the outside world are actually wonderful qualities and wonderful traits and wonderful behaviors, like being reasonable, having critical thinking, or being open-minded. But these are considered bad in Scientology, and that makes the fact that they are bad diagnostic about the group itself. And I don't know if Scientology knows just how bad it makes it look. So another idea of hers that was so compelling was the idea that she saw dissociation as a superpower. When you're in a group where when you dissociate, it's considered a superpower, then you're not fully present. You're not able to use your critical thinking. You're not able to protect yourself. And also that they made her feel scared, and everyone feels scared of going to the psychs, the therapists, the psychologists, the ones who could help. Because one of the things that they supposedly do to people is they put people under hypnosis, kind of in a hypnotic spell. But that's what so much of the training in Scientology is about. So many people say they had to sit in one place for hours and hours and do things repetitively. Tell me what's not hypnotic about that. I also love that she talked about Scientology being her first language. It really is its own language. And I have a hard copy of their dictionary, and it is heavy, and it's big, and it's unwieldy and overwhelming, I'm sure, for new members. She also talked about something called a meat body. And sometimes when you hear these terms, when people have been raised saying these things, I think they might lose sight of what it sounds to other people, even though I think now she has the perspective because she's been out for a while. But I've noticed with people who have left cultic groups, they kind of gauge other people's responses to the things that they say. And then they have that moment of reflection where they say, oh, right, this isn't usual. This isn't actually something that is used in the world outside. But also when you hear about something like a meat body, it's very dramatic and kind of science fiction-y and disturbing. And actually the science fiction-y part of it is no surprise because L. Ron Hubbard was a science fiction writer. What I think is also important is that she gave a quote by Aristotle, which I think gives some context to all of this. When you talk about things like meat bodies and when you talk about what you're allowed to think and what you're not allowed to think, And that within Scientology, you need to believe everything you're taught, or there's something wrong with you, or you're being resistant to it in some way. And just because it's fed to you means you have to take it in and you have to believe it and you have to live your life by following those rules or following those ideas. The quote by Aristotle that she gave was really a wonderful one. And it is this: it is the mark of an educated mind to entertain a thought without accepting it. So, yes, to entertain a thought, to take it in for a moment, to wonder about it, to learn about it, to research it, to absorb it. But you don't have to accept it. You don't have to believe in it, especially if it goes against logic or if it goes against your value system or if it just doesn't make sense to you or if it's something you absolutely disagree with. No, you don't have to accept it. But as we talked about in these kinds of groups, you don't have the luxury of rejecting an idea. You don't have the luxury of waiting to get proof, to do your research, to get objective and outside validation. And what's also true is that within these groups, you're given praise for believing these ideas and for believing them without question, for believing them without any kind of doubt. And you're considered more of a devoted member. You're considered to be more wise, more committed if you believe all of these things without question. And sometimes you get a more elevated position in the organization, and people also look up to you as someone who is more wise within the organization, and kind of you get this greater merit and are seen in a higher light than others. It is very interesting, I think, then to think about another quote. I found it after my conversation with Vanessa, and I think it ties in very well here. It's by an educator named Lawrence Peter, who said to the Associated Press, "Some problems and ideas are so complex that you have to be smart and well informed just to be undecided about them." Please try to remember that. It's really okay to be undecided. That's using your critical thinking, and that's okay by me. Talk to you next week.